a Griot audio production of Bling by Erica Kennedy. This unabridged recording is narrated by Kevin R. Free and directed by Julie Pecoyan. Griot Audio celebrates the best in contemporary African American fiction and nonfiction. This book is copyrighted 2004 by Erica Kennedy Johnson. This recording is copyrighted 2005 by Recorded Books, producer and publisher of Griot Audio. When 21-year-old Mimi travels from a small town in Ohio to New York for an audition with Lamont Jackson, head of the hottest hip-hop label in the business, she has no idea that her life is about to change overnight. But sometimes change has a price. And now, Bling.
Intro. Lamont sauntered into the grill room like he owned the place. "Mr. Jackson," the maitre d' greeted him warmly. "Mr. Green is waiting at your usual table." Lamont gifted him with a courteous half-smile. Their usual table was the best one in the Midtown Manhattan restaurant where the power players converged. A dark-skinned man with an imposing build and a cocksure swagger, Lamont Jackson was not conventionally handsome. Rather, he had that well-groomed sheen particular to rich, image-conscious men. He cut a formidable swath as he strode through the room in his favorite Brioni suit, chin up, acknowledging fellow members of the media elite with friendly nods, the masculine scent of his Bulgari cologne lingering in his wake. He derived a soul-deep satisfaction from being watched, being known. He felt their eyes upon him as he approached Irv Green, the 66-year-old chairman of Augusta Music, who had been ranked number 10 on last year's Entertainment Weekly Power 100. After his own record label had achieved its best year to date, Lamont had landed in the magazine's annual honorable mention spot at 100.5. An insult. He would have preferred not to have been mentioned at all. Lamont consulted his Patek Philippe as he slid into the booth. "Am I late?" Irv Green was a stickler for punctuality. It was something he and Lamont had in common. "No," Irv said cordially, not bothering to get up. "Right on time." They enjoyed a warm professional relationship. There was no need for formality, though if Lamont had arrived first, he would have instinctively stood to greet the music industry legend. They ordered lunch and made small talk until Irv finally addressed the unspoken topic hanging in the air. "So it's true," he announced between bites of salmon. "Really?" Lamont attempted to sound surprised, even though rumors had been swirling for a month. "They want you out?" "Yeah," Irv said. "The fuckers." He leaned over and in a confidential whisper said, "So everyone knows already, huh?" "Well, not everyone." "What are people saying?" "Listen," Lamont said, "HMG can't ask you to step down. They have no cause." "None," Irv agreed immediately. "It's a forced retirement." He was reconciled to the fact that he was being pushed out as the head of Augusta, where he had been cranking out hits for more than 30 years. "What bullshit!" Lamont spat, truly outraged. Even at 38 years old, as the CEO of Triple Large Entertainment, the hip-hop label he'd founded in a joint venture with Augusta, Lamont was feeling the heat from younger moguls in training. "Bullshit it is," Irv sighed. "But we operate in a world that worships the young and exiles the old." He shrugged. He'd been wrestling with the dilemma for a month and had let go of the anger. Technically, Lamont had to report to Irv, but mostly he was the master of his own ship. Irv wasn't going to tell Lamont, an African-American who had the pulse of urban culture, how to run a hip-hop label. Irv had been one of Lamont's most vocal supporters to the higher-ups at HMG, the German conglomerate that owned Augusta. The same fuckers who were trying to push Irv out of his job. "You remember the first time we had lunch here?" Lamont reflected. 9 years ago, when we were working out the joint venture." "I remember it like it was yesterday," Irv said. "You had on jeans that were too baggy. Air Jordans, a yellow-hooded Morehouse sweatshirt, and you kept taking calls on a cell phone that was the size of a brick. I was embarrassed to be seen with you." Lamont didn't want to be reminded of that. "But remember what you said to me that day? People were just starting to realize hip-hop wasn't a passing fad. I said the Germans at HMG were racist, and the only reason they wanted to get in bed with me was because green was the only color that could blind them to my own." Irv nodded. "And I said, I'm a Jew from Canarsie. You think they like me better? To them, we're both niggas. Accept it and move on." They both chuckled at the recollection. "It was the best advice I'd ever gotten," Lamont said. "Still is." He'd learned so much from Irv. How to handle corporate politics, how to groom and break an artist, even how to dress. Lamont looked at Irv now, casually attired in a white shirt, no tie, what was left of his dark brown hair elegantly slicked back. The shirt was so crisp, so sturdy, so blindingly white it almost had a celestial glow. Where did you even buy a shirt like that, and how much did it cost? "You also said," Lamont continued the trip down memory lane to massage Irv's ego, "you make hit records, we all make money, and everyone's happy." A thoughtful pause. "You've been producing hits for 35 years, Irv. You've made them a lot of money. You're still at the top of your game. It's not right what they're trying to do. That's what everyone's saying." Irv smiled and raised his glass in appreciation. "So what's next?" Lamont asked casually. Self-serving to the bone, he was more curious about what this shakeup meant for him than his mentor. "Golf's not my thing," Irv said. "Might start my own label. I can write my own ticket." A deferential, "Of course." "And they're still deciding on my replacement." The pause was so pregnant, it was expecting triplets. "Say it," Lamont silently urged. "Say it." Irv Green looked across the table and smiled genially. "If it were up to me, the job would be yours today. But I do know you're at the top of their list." Lamont leaned his considerable girth back on the leather banquette and pushed his plate of risotto away, taking a moment to compose himself so his deep baritone would not sound too eager in reply. He felt like jumping up in the packed dining room and shouting, "I'm ready!" But he only shifted slightly, and when he spoke, he sounded cool and calm. "You know, I've been thinking of branching out," he said, "doing some R&B shit. I have some things in the works right now." "Wonderful," Irv enthused. "That's what you need to do. Show the Nazis you're not a one-trick pony." Irv wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin. "There's still a lot to be worked out before I leave. Everyone's going to be watching you, Monty. Show 'em what you can do." As soon as Lamont hopped into the back of his Mercedes Maybach, he called Daryl McHenry, his all-purpose whipping boy. They'd already spoken about the brilliant idea that had come to Lamont last night. Daryl was just waiting for the word. Lamont had 3 for him. Call the girl. Disc 1. On the come-up. Chapter 1. "Excuse me, miss." "'Cause we ain't nobody," LaToya said. Lakeisha turned from peering out the window of the Chesterfield Hotel, annoyed because her question, "Why they got us staying in this bum-ass hotel?" had been a rhetorical one. There was no view, just another hotel across 37th Street, and from what little she could see, the rooms over there were nicer. "I know," Keisha said, "but still, we didn't even get a limo from the airport." "We don't need a limo," Mimi said, busily straightening up. "They sent a car and it was fine." "Why are you cleaning up Kenny's room?" Keisha said, stretching out on the perfectly made bed. "Because I already finished with ours," Mimi said. "I can't just sit around doing nothing, waiting for the phone to ring. It's driving me crazy." They were sharing the adjoining room, but they were camped out here because their manager, Kenny Hill, would get the call, at the hotel since his cell phone service had been interrupted for non-payment, and they wanted to be there when he did. "Let's eat," Keisha said. "That'll give us something to do." She picked up the room service menu. "We can order food, right?" She frowned over at Toya. "They pay for that?" Last night, after their audition at the Triple Large offices, they had gone to Planet Hollywood for dinner, hoping to spot some celebrities, unaware that it was a tourist trap populated by autograph seekers like themselves, where no celebrity would ever be caught dead. "I don't know," Toya said wearily. Keisha was always looking for a free meal, literally and figuratively, and it got under Toya's skin that she was so simple-minded. "You need to ask Kenny." "Where's he at, anyway?" Keisha said. She twirled one of her long micro-braids. "It don't take that long to buy a pack of Newports." Mimi didn't care about the low-budget accommodations or that there had been no limo yesterday. Keisha thought this whole trip was going to be like an episode of Making the Band. She was obsessed with that show. Kenny did nothing to dissuade her from thinking it was going to be limos, parties, and Cristal bottles popping. But why on earth would anyone do that for them? They were nobodies. But they had come here to change that. They'd all met at Performing Arts School of Toledo. They joked they were like TLC, whose Crazy Sexy Cool album was one of their all-time favorites. Keisha, big-boned and equipped with a razor-sharp tongue, was the crazy component. Toya, a round-faced girl with a heartwarming smile and a degree of self-assurance that belied her years, was the cool. And Mimi, well, she wasn't wild like Keisha, and she didn't possess Toya's innate confidence, so sometimes she felt she got the sexy slot by default. No doubt Mimi was pretty. Since she was a baby, everyone had remarked on it. But in her usual baggy gear, sexy she was not. Tight jeans and midriff-bearing tops invited attention, and as a biracial girl in a predominantly black school, she already stood out enough. All she'd ever wanted was to blend in. Her mother, Angela, was Italian, and Mimi couldn't remember her Haitian father. Jacques Bertrand had run out on Angela a year after their only child was born, and the annual birthday cards that had arrived, late, with no return address, stopped arriving altogether after Mimi's 8th birthday. She kept the details of her home life to herself, as she did most things, managing to pull straight A's while dodging the taunts of white girl and high yellow heifer, as if she thought she was better than the other girls. Just like many of them, she was raised by an overworked single mother. She rode the bus to school from the bad side of town, and the clothes over which they ran a disapproving you-think-you-cute eye were paid for by the after-school jobs she'd been juggling since she was 14. She never made her looks an issue. They did. Toya, however, was different. She made that clear only 2 months into freshman year, when Nichelle Griffin had stormed over to Mimi in the cafeteria and began to lay into her for coming on to her boyfriend, even though it had been Nichelle's wannabe teenage Lothario who had been coming on to a completely uninterested Mimi. Toya, who Mimi knew only casually, had calmly looked over her shoulder from the next table and said, "You just mad because you wish you had that long hair. Go get yourself a weave and shut the hell up." Keisha, always spoiling for a fight of any kind, had jumped up to enter the fray, but Nichelle had slunk away before she could. Toya, Keisha, and Mimi had been friends ever since. Later that year, their group was formed. They named it Heart Song. They debated endlessly about what kinds of songs they should sing, what kind of group they wanted to be. Keisha and Toya were into hip-hop. Mimi's tastes fell more on the soul side. She idolized those female artists whose songs stirred something inside her more than an urge to dance. Her mother had harbored dreams of being a singer way back when, and music was the only constant in their unstable lives. From Aretha to Alanis Morissette, Sarah Vaughan to Sarah McLachlan, Mimi would close her eyes and try to mimic their every inflection, pretending she was them, not a girl from Toledo who wouldn't recognize her own father if she passed him on the street. That was how she got through performing on stage. She became someone else, whoever song she was belting out. She was pretending to be Beyoncé on the night they met Kenny at a local talent show. Heartsong had just won the top prize and $300 for their rousing rendition of Bills, 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 the Destiny's Child hit. A lanky, dark-skinned man of 34 with droopy eyes and a seemingly permanent deposit of white crust in the corner of his mouth. Kenny Hill's name was one they recognized from flyers posted all over town. A part-time club promoter, he told them he knew every musician, nightclub owner, and DJ in Toledo, which in retrospect they realized wasn't saying all that much. He proffered a business card that read simply Talent Manager, and they didn't know to ask him for any credentials beyond the promises he made. He talked about getting them a record deal, and he didn't ask them for money, and so it was that Kenny Hill became their manager. He had arranged for them to sing backup on demos at Wildside Studios in exchange for free studio time to record their own music. He kept telling them that he was setting up auditions with labels, but nothing ever panned out. And they'd graduated high school 2 years ago. The day after they tossed their caps, Mimi's part-time job at the discount emporium Save Mart became full-time. Toya was doing hair at Black Roots, without a license, and Keisha wasn't doing much of anything, except hanging out with her crazy-ass drug dealer boyfriend. They'd finished their demo, using tracks Kenny bought from a local producer, and singing generic R&B lyrics that Kenny had written himself. Kenny Hill, club promoter, talent manager, songwriter. Jack of all trades and master of none. When he finally got a callback from Triple Large Entertainment a week ago, he didn't tell the girls right away that they had a chance at a recording contract. Instead, he'd gotten everything in order, wrangling 4 coach plane tickets to New York, 2 $99 per night rooms at the Chesterfield, before he strolled into Wildside Studios and crowed triumphantly, "Pack your bags, girls! We're going to New York!" Call the girl. Why did Lamont always have to be so dramatic? Daryl wanted to call the girl, but he couldn't even remember the bitch's name. La-something. Lavon? No, LaToya. Or maybe that was the other one. He'd already asked Lamont's assistant and the receptionist if they remembered the name of the pretty one, because he couldn't find the group's bio and attached photo. With all the groups that had come through the office in the last few weeks, no one could remember a damn thing about any of them. Now Daryl rummaged through all the useless office memos on his desk in search of the package the manager had left with him the other day. Daryl's office was tiny. So was he. But what he lacked in size, he more than made up for in self-aggrandizement. He was 5'5" and 3/4 of an inch, but whenever anyone dared to question his height, he'd pull out his driver's license. Bam! 5'7". People always took that as gospel, as if the DMV actually measured folks. His office would have felt larger if he'd cleared out the half-dozen boxes of demos he was supposed to listen to as the A&R rep of Triple Large Entertainment. When he first got the gig, he didn't even know what A&R stood for. Artist and repertoire, he was told. He still didn't entirely understand, but he'd figured out he was expected to discover new artists and work on their development once they were signed. That he could do, although he really wanted to be a producer solely and forget the office bullshit. He rarely got around to assessing the volumes of material that found their way into the Midtown office. Most artists who got signed had already made names for themselves on the street, or were affiliated with an established hip-hop clique. The next big thing rarely arrived unannounced via the United States Postal Service. Nevertheless, Paul Mankiewicz, the label's VP of A&R, stayed on Daryl's ass about listening to every single submission. A strapping, floppy-haired white guy in his mid-30s, Paul Mankiewicz made 6 figures and his own hours. He was nicknamed Witchy because he had successfully cultivated so many R&B and hip-hop acts at various record companies that people said he could work black magic. 23-year-old Daryl didn't have an official title. He was usually called the A&R guy, which he preferred to being called Witchy's assistant. Though affable to most, Witchy cracked the whip on his departmental subordinate, mostly Daryl believed as a form of insurance. If Witchy failed to meet his monthly beat-up-on-Daryl quota, Witchy was guaranteed to receive a few lashes from the HNIC himself, Lamont Fat Man Jackson. Daryl idolized and despised Fat Man with equal fervor. Some days he wished he were standing tall in Lamont's $400 shoes, making big moves and bigger bank. Other days he hoped Lamont Jackson would keel over and die from a massive coronary and spend all eternity rotting in hell. A few months ago, Fat Man had put out the call that they'd be branching out into R&B. They were hoping to find the next Destiny's Child. In the past 2 months, they'd seen 27 groups. None of them got past their first song. After an audition 2 days ago of 3 white girls with varying degrees of pink hair who called themselves Shades, it was obvious Witchy was digging at the bottom of the barrel. Lamont had turned to Witchy and said, "Mr. Mankiewicz, why do I feel like I'm a judge on American Idol?" Daryl had fallen back on Lamont's sofa and laughed. It was a joy to see Witchy catching some flack for a change, but the most hysterical part was that Lamont was beginning to resemble the fat guy on the show. And then this group Heart Song, the worst fucking name, had come in yesterday. Daryl had only listened to their demo as a favor to Megan, Triple Large's certified hottie receptionist. She'd urged him to listen to it, saying the manager was a friend of her cousin's friend. "Oh, well, I'll give it the VIP treatment right now," Daryl had clowned. Like he cared. It was certain to be garbage, but if it brought him one small step toward getting some pussy from Megan, it was worth a listen. And what did you know? It wasn't bad. Not bad at all. Witchy was heated when he found out Daryl had flown them in without consulting him. One of the girls, the one with the long braids, had to be 20 pounds heavier than she'd been when the bio picture was taken. And the manager was annoying as hell. Daryl had to shove him out of Lamont's office as he tried to sell him on 2 other hip-hop acts he managed. The group's audition didn't seem to ignite much enthusiasm in Lamont, although he didn't say that he straight up hated them, which was his response to most of the 27 who'd come before. This morning, Lamont had called Daryl, at the crack of dawn, to say maybe they didn't need a group after all. Actually, his first words were, "Where the hell is Witchy?" Daryl rolled over, looked at the ungodly hour, and yawned, "At home sleeping, maybe?" Lamont grunted his disapproval, then told Daryl he'd had a moment of revelation. He decided they needed just one girl, a solo artist. He wanted to meet with the lead singer of Heart Song. The pretty one, he'd said. Daryl finally found the bio picture sticking out of a stack of magazines on the floor. Mimi, that was her name. He looked at his fake Rolex. Damn, it was already 4:15 and Lamont wanted her down there by 5. He picked up the phone and dialed the hotel. This chick could be his first discovery. And if a signing came out of this, he wouldn't let Witchy or Fat Man forget it. Chapter 2. If I Ruled the World. Lamont climbed the winding staircase to his home gym, thinking, Lamont Jackson, chairman of Augusta Music. Had a nice ring to it. He'd be able to sell Triple Large to Augusta, but he'd still retain control of the label he'd founded as well as run several others. How much would the deal reap? 60 million? No, Triple Large was worth 75 at least. He stepped onto the treadmill and poked a few buttons. He usually worked out in the evening after coming home from the office and before going out for dinner and whatever else the night offered. But today, he'd come home right after his lunch meeting with Irv. One of the perks of being a top dog. You didn't have to account for your whereabouts to anyone. These workouts were often the only time he spent alone in an entire day. At the office, he had his minions swarming around and his faithful assistant Imani hovering nearby. At night, out at the most exclusive clubs, his entourage was always surrounding him. When traveling in his Maybach or Suburban, money green, fully loaded, his driver, Carlos, was at the wheel. And when he finally fell asleep in this Tribeca triplex, there was almost always a gorgeous babe in bed beside him. He had tried working out with a highly recommended personal trainer, but the guy had annoyed him and was fired after 2 sessions. Anyway, He had gotten the information he needed and could continue the exercise regimen without some faggot Richard Simmons wannabe counting off repetitions and applauding him afterward like he'd just run the New York City Marathon. He had nothing against a little ass-kissing, as long as his ass was the one on the receiving end. It was actually one of his favorite things. But he got more than his fair share of that every day. And he'd gotten an uncomfortable feeling that that guy had wanted to kiss his ass for real. Besides, working out alone gave him a chance to decompress and think. The thought that was going through his mind right now was, I need a hit. A blinding success story that would prove, to Irv Green, to the heads of HMG, to the world, that he deserved the top job at Augusta. 9 years ago, he had been one of hip-hop's corporate trailblazers, founding Triple Large Entertainment long before rappers were starring in movies, shilling for Sprite, and mingling with high society. His early track record as a label head had been unimpressive. The first few artists he'd released had come and gone without much fanfare, and been summarily dropped from the label. Then, 3 of his acts achieved gold record status, and selling 500,000 albums had still meant big success then. How far the bar had risen in only a few years. Now, a record that was merely gold certified meant one with lackluster sales. Lamont didn't allow the word failure to be uttered by anyone within his ranks. In a slumping industry where music downloading had become an escalating problem and major labels were regularly laying off hundreds of employees, posting profits was more difficult and more important than ever. Lamont's first big success was Floss, a raspy-voiced West Coast rapper who wove biblical sayings into his rhymes about his ghetto-fabulous lifestyle. He became the label's resident sex symbol, despite the fact that he had one prosthetic leg. He'd lost his left leg below the shin after a car accident when he was 16, and claimed to have had a near-death experience and found God. Floss gave a whole new meaning to the term hip-hop. His debut, Profit and Floss, came close to selling 500,000 copies, although his bio said it was certified gold anyway. Ridiculous, Triple Large's hip-hop comedian rapped about girls, parties, and mostly himself. Lamont had come up with the name following the phonetic spellings or cooler tradition that the younger rappers seemed to favor. He thought Ridiculous was an improvement over the rapper's original moniker, Big D-I-C-K. He could just imagine MTV having a heart attack over that. Dickey's first album, Ha Ha, made some noise with 2 hit singles, but Lamont was disappointed with its performance. 2 million copies sold of the rapper's second effort, No Foolin', more than made up for any bad feelings. But it was a plasma-obsessed rapper named MC Grimy who had taken Lamont and TLE to the next level. Grimy's first album, Bloodhound, went gold. His second, Hematoma, went platinum, selling 1 million copies in total. His third, Code Red, sold 2 million in its first 2 months. And his next, Crimson Tide, was the TLE all-time bestseller at 4 million copies to date. When Lamont learned that Grimy had taken an IQ test as a child and scored a staggeringly high 140, Lamont started calling Grimy his thug genius. He was pleased when that nickname got picked up in the press. It appeared in large type next to Grimy's head when the toned rapper was featured, shirtless and splattered with blood, on a controversial Rolling Stone cover. Controversial in large part because Grimy had shown up for the photo shoot toting a cooler containing 4 hermetically sealed bags of human blood of unknown origin. Thereafter, Lamont's publicist let it be known that Lamont himself had coined the term. Grimy's success had really put the company on the map. The Triple Large imprimatur meant something now. When a new album was released from the Triple Large stable, hip-hop consumers, 80% of whom were suburban white kids, took notice. Floss's second album, Gimme the Loot, had gone double platinum. O Negative, Grimy's latest LP, had just reached 3 million. And from the looks of the first week's sales numbers, Ridiculous's Straight Clownin' was on track to do even better. The R&B and hip-hop infused movie soundtracks TLE produced had become a business unto themselves, and Lamont had formed a separate division around them, Triple Large Tracks. 10 soundtracks released in the last 5 years, and they'd all gone at least platinum. With his label dominating the industry, Lamont was firmly lodged in the top tier of the crop of new black moguls. But he didn't want to be one of. He wanted to be king, the one and only. And as the new chairman of Augusta Music, that's what he would be. By the time the girls' late afternoon snack arrived, Keisha's nerves had gotten the best of her and she was in the bathroom vomiting up lunch. It was then that the phone finally rang. But it was the phone in their room, not in Kenny's as they'd expected. While Toya tended to Keisha, Mimi walked through the adjoining door to answer it. It was probably her worrisome mother. She'd already phoned twice today. "Can I talk to Mimi?" said the caller. "This is. Hey, it's Daryl from Triple Large. Kenny there?" "No," she said, excited to be hearing from him. "He went out." "Good. Look, meet me downtown at 5 o'clock, 86 Walker Street. Don't say shit to Kenny. Not a word." "I don't know if we can get there by 5. Keisha is kind of sick right now." "No, just you. Don't say anything to them yet either. Tell them you have to meet a friend or something. I'll explain when you get there. 86 Walker. I'll meet you downstairs. Take a cab. I'll pay for it." "But what?" Mimi began. "Don't stress me." Daryl cut her off. "Just get down there by 5. You're already running late." Mimi hung up the phone and stared at it. What was going on? If she were to tell the God's honest truth, she hadn't expected them to call. At least, not to say they wanted them. The audition hadn't gone very well. They'd all been so nervous. Keisha's voice cracking was the low point. But she was trying to remain optimistic, for herself as much as for the other girls. Yesterday, Lamont Jackson, the head of the label, hadn't said goodbye, or thanks for coming, or nice job. Nothing. He'd picked up his telephone before they were out the door and started dialing as if their performance had been an unwanted interruption in his daily business routine. The last to file out, she'd looked back at him. The phone to his ear, he caught her glance and finally cracked a small smile. Of encouragement or pity, she wasn't sure. Lamont had seemed to be channeling his thoughts to Daryl, who had done all the talking. Daryl had said they'd have an answer today. "Yay or nay," he told Kenny. So which does this call mean? She wondered. Yay or nay? And what was all this come alone business? When she walked back into Kenny's room, Keisha was lying on the bed with a wet rag on her face, moaning like she'd just given birth. "Are you okay?" Mimi said, kneeling beside her. "No," Keisha moaned. "Was that your mother again?" Toya asked. No," Mimi said hesitantly. "It was some guy, the son of my mom's friend. He lives here. He wants me to come meet him right now, at this place just around the corner." Too much detail. She was lying, poorly, and for what? The address Daryl had given her wasn't the address of the office. Despite Daryl's fierce warning, she wished she could talk to Kenny first before she did anything. Where the heck was he? He'd left almost 2 hours ago. And why couldn't he pay his cell phone bill? "What place?" Toya questioned. Mimi said, trying to come up with a name. But she didn't know New York, so she just turned and walked back into their room, hoping Toya wouldn't ask again. "Mimi, what if they call?" Keisha whined. "Not if," Toya corrected. "They said they'd call today." "Well, they might say they want us, or they might say they don't," Keisha countered, getting her energy back. "I'll call you guys in an hour," Mimi said, changing out of her sweats as Toya watched from the doorway. Mimi went to the closet and considered her clothing options. She couldn't wear the tight stretch jeans and cropped peasant top that she'd worn yesterday for the audition. Toya and Keisha had worn the exact same outfit, so Daryl would surely remember it. Besides, that look was a tad hoochie for her personal taste. During their search for the perfect audition attire, Keisha and Toya had nixed her more conservative suggestions. "You don't even know this guy," Toya complained. "Forget him." "I can't." Mimi held up the black turtleneck with the bell sleeves that she had worn on the plane. I already told him I would come, so... She shrugged. Yes, it would be the turtleneck with army green cargo pants, and her leather boots with the platform heels instead of the slutty high heels Kenny had insisted they wear yesterday. Is he cute? Toya said. Who? The guy you're meeting. I don't know, I've never met him. She was already lying, so best to leave it at that. Mimi went into the bathroom and momentarily thought about telling Keisha and Toya the truth as she pulled back her wild mass of chestnut brown curls into a neat ponytail. She put on her favorite dangling silver and turquoise earrings, even though they stretched her lobes, because she loved how they chimed with every step she took. She didn't have time for all the makeup Kenny had ordered them to pile on yesterday. Just a little concealer to cover the rash of pimples that seemed to be multiplying on her forehead. No, she decided as she applied some cherry-flavored lip gloss, she wouldn't tell them. She'd do this alone, as Daryl had said, find out what was up, and then report back. Kenny had to be the problem. Seeing him in that plush New York office, sporting his best nylon tracksuit, had made it glaringly obvious how small time he was. When he had tried to give Lamont a demo of a male hip-hop group he was representing, it was obvious that Lamont was not the least bit interested. Kenny kept saying, just listen to the first track, it's on fire. Daryl had almost been forced to shove him out of Lamont's office. I'm the lead singer, Mimi told herself. I can handle this. Imagine if she could come back and tell them they had a deal. Okay. Toya finally relented. A little late, as Mimi was already grabbing her knitted poncho and suede hobo bag and heading for the door. Maybe he's cute, and maybe we're gonna get signed, and maybe we're gonna move here, and maybe we'll be famous, and maybe he'll be your man. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mimi said, shooting Toya a smile as she walked out the door. Chapter 3. Can't Knock the Hustle.